Have you ever stopped to think that maybe the very policies designed to make education fairer might actually make things less equal?
It's a really complex issue.
Yeah. Today, we're doing a deep dive into UK educational policy. It's a fascinating, sometimes messy history. We're going to unpack how these big plans have shaped and often, well, reshaped social inequalities over the years.
Yeah, consistently.
Our mission here is basically to give you a shortcut through this whole landscape. We'll look at how different governments tried to improve things, what they were really aiming for, their ideologies, and crucially, what actually happened on the ground, especially for class, gender, ethnicity.
It's a story with a lot of twists, definitely.
Absolutely. So before we jump in, maybe you could quickly define what we mean by educational policies, just to set the scene.
Sure. So think of them as the plans, the actions that governments and local councils put in place for the education system. And they're never neutral, right? They always reflect some underlying political idea, labor's goals, the conservatives' approach, whatever it might be. And they have loads of aims. Raising standards, yeah, but also maybe equality of opportunity, meeting the needs of the economy, or even just controlling what gets taught.
Okay, so they're the tools governments use to shape education.
Exactly, for better or worse.
Got it. So with that foundation, let's start the journey. We'll see how these grand ideas sometimes led to pretty surprising outcomes. Okay, let's unpack this.
We'll do it.
So we're starting right after the Second World War. The first really big policy, the Tripartite System, came in with the 1944 Education Act under labor. And this was meant to be a massive change.
Oh, absolutely massive. The aims were, well, revolutionary back then, free secondary education for all kids, which was huge.
Yeah.
And they wanted parity of esteem, this idea that different types of schools should be seen as equally good. And crucially, they aimed for a true meritocracy. Your ability, not your parents' money, should decide your future.
That sounds incredibly optimistic. So how did it actually work, the structure?
Well, the key thing was the 11+ exam. At age 11, kids sat this test.
The infamous 11 plus best.
Exactly. And based on that one test, you were sent to one of three types of school. Pass high, you go to grammar school academic aiming for uni.
Right.
Didn't pass or didn't pass high enough.
Yeah.
The vast majority went to secondary moderns, more practical vocational focus.
Okay.
And then there were supposed to be technical schools for specialized skills, but honestly, very few actually got built. So it was mostly grammar or secondary modern.
And the impact. Did it deliver on that meritocracy promise?
Not really. That's the consensus. Imagine being 11, maybe from a working class home, facing this exam that felt, well, culturally quite middle class in its assumptions.
Yeah, I can see that.
So for loads of working class kids, that test basically sealed their fate early on, pushing them towards the secondary moderns. It ended up reproducing class inequality, not overcoming it.
So the system itself kind of sorted kids by class despite the intention?
Pretty much. And there was gender inequality, too. Often, girls needed to score higher than boys on the 11+ just to get into the same grammar school.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So ultimately, it failed on that equality promise. Critics quickly called it a myth of meritocracy. It sounded good, but didn't deliver.
Okay, so a system with major flaws right from the start, essentially. That must have led to pressure for change.
Huge pressure,
Yeah.
especially regarding that class divide it created.
Which brings us then to the comprehensive system. Started rolling out from 1965, labor government again. What was the big idea this time?
The big idea was simple, really. Get rid of the division, abolish the 11+ ADI, abolish the grammar secondary modern split, and have all kids in a local area attend the same type of school, the comprehensive.
One school for everyone.
Exactly. The aim was to promote social mixing, break down those class barriers that the tripartite system had solidified, and offer more equal opportunities within one institution.
So the structure just involved local councils reorganizing schools into these neighborhood comprehensives.
Pretty much, yeah. They were encouraged to move away from selection at 11 and create these all-in-one schools.
And did it work? What was the impact this time?
Well, in one key way, yes. It was largely successful in getting rid of that obvious segregation between different types of schools based on the 11+ box. So that was a big step.
Okay.
However, and this is crucial, inequality didn't just disappear. It often just moved inside the comprehensive school walls.
Ah, right. How so?
Many comprehensives still use streaming or setting grouping kids by perceived ability for different subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And research, like Ford's back in 1969, showed that this could end up reproducing class inequalities within the school.
Mm-hmm.
Working-class kids often ended up in lower streams, limiting their interaction with middle-class peers and potentially their access to the higher-level curriculum.
So less segregation between schools, but still segregation within them.
Exactly. It tackled one problem, but didn't fully solve the underlying issue of how schooling interacts with social class.
That's a really important point. It shows how tricky achieving real equality is. But okay, the policy pendulum swings again. Big time, it seems, with the 1988 Education Reform Act under the conservatives. Marketisation, parentocracy. This sounds like a completely different philosophy.
Oh, it was a seismic shift, absolutely.
Hmm.
Driven by new right ideas, it moved away from state control towards, well, market principles.
So what were the aims?
The stated aims were clear: raise standards overall, make schools more efficient by forcing them to compete for students, and give parents more consumer choice. The core belief is that competition would drive up quality everywhere.
And how did they try to create this market? What were the key policies?
A whole raft of them, really. You had league tables publicly ranking schools on exam results. Huge pressure there.
I bet.
Austin inspections for accountability, a national curriculum to standardize teaching, open enrollment, meaning popular schools could expand, and formula funding money followed the pupil, so schools had a direct financial incentive to attract more students.
Wow, okay. That's a lot of mechanisms designed to fuel competition. What was the impact on inequality?
Significant and mostly negative, according to many sociologists. It led to what researchers called cream skimming and silt shifting.
Right, explain those.
Cream skimming is where the good schools, the ones high up the league tables, become oversubscribed and can be more selective, often favoring more able, typically middle-class pupils.
Okay.
Silt shifting is the flip side: schools trying to avoid taking on less able pupils, often working class or those with special needs, because they might drag down their league table position.
That sounds pretty cynical.
It reflects the pressures the system created. And Stephen Ball's work on parentocracy is key here. He argued it's a myth that all parents have real choice.
How so?
He found middle-class parents who are often skilled choosers. They have the cultural capital, the knowledge, the confidence, the networks, and often the economic capital, maybe to move house, to really work the system and get their kids into the best schools.
Whereas working class parents.
Often disconnected choosers. They might lack the detailed knowledge, the transport options, or just feel less empowered to navigate this complex market. So choice isn't equal at all.
Right. And you also mentioned something called educational triage.
Yes, Gilborn and Udell's concept. They argued market pressures led schools to focus their resources strategically. They concentrate on the borderline CD grade students who might just tip over into getting 5 good GCSEs, boosting the school's stats.
Makes sense from the school's perspective.
But it potentially means less attention for the safe AB students, and crucially, less for the perceived hopeless cases, often working class or certain minority ethnic pupils who seem unlikely to reach that benchmark anyway. They get triaged out, resource-wise.
So the pursuit of league table success could actually lead to neglecting the students who need the most help.
Precisely. That's the argument. So the overall picture from this era, despite the talk of choice, is one where many argue inequality was actually entrenched, maybe even widened.
So if market forces seem to deepen the divides, what happened when the political landscape shifted again with New Labor in 1997? Did they try to roll back marketization or find a different path?
Well, they didn't entirely roll it back. Their approach was often called the third way, trying to blend market ideas with a stronger focus on social justice and tackling disadvantage, a kind of balancing act.
Okay, so what did that look like in practice? What policies did they introduce?
Quite a few targeted initiatives. You had Sure Start centers in deprived areas focusing on early years support to try and level the playing field from the beginning.
Right, I remember those.
There were education action zones, EAZs, giving extra funding to schools in challenging areas, excellence in cities, aim higher programs specifically designed to get more disadvantaged kids thinking about and going to university.
So lots of specific interventions for poorer areas and groups.
Exactly. But they also continued with some market elements like the Early Academies program, taking schools out of local authority control, and specialist schools, allowing schools to develop a focus.
So a mix of targeted help and continued structural reform.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. And the impact? Well, it was mixed. There's evidence of some modest success for disadvantaged groups in certain areas. Standards did rise overall.
Yeah.
But the fundamental effects of marketization, the competition, the pressures, they largely remained. Critics often call the initiatives patchy. Their success wasn't uniform. It depended a lot on local factors. The deep structures hadn't entirely changed.
Okay, so some progress, but maybe not the fundamental shift needed, which then takes us to the coalition government from 2010 and subsequent conservative governments. What were their priorities? Did they continue that third way or shift again?
A definite shift again. The emphasis remained on standards, absolutely, but there was a much stronger drive to reduce the state's direct role in running schools and encourage more diversity of school types outside local council control.
Right, so less local authority involvement.
Much less. This mainly happened through a massive expansion of the academies program that New Labor started, and the introduction of free schools, new schools set up by parents, charities, religious groups, etc., funded by the state, but run independently.
So lots more independent state schools. What else?
The pupil premium was a big one, extra money given to schools specifically for each disadvantaged pupil on their roll. That was their main policy lever intended to tackle inequality directly.
Okay.
They also introduced the English Baccalaureate, EBAC, pushing a core set of traditional academic subjects. But alongside this, you had the period of austerity.
Ah, yes, the cuts.
Big cuts to public spending, which hit things like youth services, some Sure Start funding was reduced, and school budgets felt the squeeze, even with the pupil premium. And of course, university tuition fees were significantly increased.
A complex mix of policies then. What's the verdict on the impact of this era?
It's still being debated intensely. We definitely ended up with a much more fragmented system. Lots of different types of schools, different chains running academies, varying levels of oversight. It's harder to get a clear national picture.
And the pupil premium. Did it work?
The jury's still out, really. Some studies show it's helped close the gap a bit in some places. Others argue it's nowhere near enough money to counteract the impact of poverty or austerity cuts elsewhere. Its effectiveness is really contested.
And the overall impact on inequality from things like academies and free schools?
Well, critics like Allen and Whitty argue these policies have actually increased inequality. They suggest free schools often pop up in more middle-class areas and that the academy system can lead to greater segregation. Coupled with austerity, the argument is that these policies tend to reproduce class divisions, benefiting those already advantaged.
So again, that tension between stated aims and actual outcomes seems really prominent.
Absolutely. It raises that fundamental question again. Who does the system, as it's currently structured, really serve best?
Let's dig into that a bit more. We've mentioned policies like Sure Start and pupil premium. These fall under compensatory education, right? Policies designed specifically to make up for disadvantage. How effective are they generally seen to be?
Right, that's the idea. Compensate for disadvantages faced outside school, whether material poverty or perceived cultural deficits. But they face a couple of key criticisms.
Okay.
One is that they can sometimes be seen as blaming the victim. They focus on fixing the deprived child or family rather than tackling the wider societal structures like poverty or inequality that caused the disadvantage in the first place.
I see. Shifting the focus away from systemic issues.
Potentially, yes. And the other issue is their effectiveness. While some programs show positive results, they're often quite modest, limited by funding, or just struggle to overcome the sheer weight of disadvantage kids might face in 247. They can help, but they're rarely a silver bullet.
Okay. What about policies targeting gender or ethnicity specifically? Have they been more successful?
Well, for gender, initiatives like GIST and WISE in the past, plus a general move to challenge stereotypes in classrooms, have actually been pretty successful in terms of girls' overall achievement. Girls now outperform boys in many areas.
Right.
Though, interestingly, gendered subject choices still persist: fewer girls in physics or computing, fewer boys in English or languages, for example. So it's not a complete fix.
And for ethnicity?
It's more complex. Policies like multicultural education, celebrating diversity, different foods, festivals are often criticized as being a bit superficial, tokenistic. They don't necessarily challenge underlying power structures or racism.
So, more surface level.
Often, yes. Anti-racist education, which actively tries to dismantle racism within the school structures and curriculum, is seen by many as more effective. But it's also been less common, harder to implement, and can be politically sensitive. Researchers like Gilbrun argue quite strongly that many policies just fail to get grips with deep-seated institutional racism that continues to disadvantage certain ethnic minority groups, regardless of the specific policy tweaks.
So, tackling those deeper systemic issues seems crucial but harder to achieve.
Okay, let's zoom out even further. Beyond specific UK government policies, how have bigger global trends like privatisation and globalisation affected things?
Hugely. They're reshaping education everywhere, including the UK. With privatization, you've got two main kinds.
Right.
There's exogenous privatization. That's external companies coming in to run schools, maybe academy chains, or providing services like IT, catering, school building management, private sector involvement from the outside.
Right.
Then there's endogenous privatization. This is about bringing market principles inside the state system. So the school competition, league tables, formula funding, making schools operate like businesses competing for customers, even if they're still technically state schools.
So privatization both from outside and changing how the inside works.
Exactly. Both push education towards a market model,
Yeah.
and then globalization adds another layer.
How so? Well, think about international league tables like PIASA. Governments get obsessed with their country's ranking, and this drives policy decisions, borrowing ideas from successful countries like Finland or Singapore.
Yeah, you hear about that a lot.
There's also the rise of global education businesses selling services, software, consultancy across borders, and policy ideas themselves travel globally. It raises big questions about whether education is becoming just another global commodity shaped by international tests and companies rather than a national system focused on its own society's needs.
That's a really profound shift to consider. Okay, let's bring this all together. We've covered a lot of ground, from 1944 right up to these global trends. Back to our main question for this deep dive. Have educational policies in the UK, particularly since that big marketisation shift in 1988, primarily served to reproduce social class inequality? What's the overall sociological take?
Well, if you weigh up the evidence we've discussed, I think the sociological consensus leans pretty strongly toward yes. While almost all policies since '88 claim to be about raising standards for everyone and increasing choice, the actual mechanisms used, particularly the market-driven reforms, the competition, the way choice actually operates, they've consistently tended to benefit middle-class families more. They're better equipped to navigate the system.
So the system advantages those already advantaged.
That's the core argument. It doesn't mean there weren't good intentions, right, or that some policies aimed at equality, like pupil premium or Sure Start, didn't have any positive impact. They did, in places.
Right, there's nuance.
Absolutely. But those efforts were often swimming against a much stronger tide of market forces and competition that tended to reinforce and sometimes worsen existing class divides. So the overall effect has arguably been reproduction rather than reduction of inequality.
So it seems that view really does hold significant weight sociologically. The evidence suggests the system's structure, its funding, how choice works in practice. It all tends to mirror and maintain those existing class differences. It's quite sobering, really.
It is. It shows how difficult genuine educational equality is to achieve through policy alone, especially when policies have unintended consequences or clash with other societal forces.
Okay, so for you, our listener, something to think about after all this. Given this history, this pattern of policies often reinforcing divides despite aiming not to, how could future policies be designed differently? How could we genuinely try to break these cycles of inequality? And thinking about marketization and parentocracy, what role do you think choice should actually play in education, knowing how unevenly that choice is often experienced?